19:37 p.m. A single handshake, just 6 digits of data, leaves the southern Indian Ocean. A signal so brief you could blink and miss it. Then, silence. For nearly 6 hours, Flight 370 had been a ghost in the sky. Its automatic system still speaking to a geostationary satellite 36,000 kilometers above Earth. Even after radar contact was lost, the plane kept whispering. But in those final 6 minutes, the whisper changes tone. Analysts would later notice an odd pattern, a sudden re-log of the SATCOM system, as if someone had cycled power mid-flight. A reset that shouldn't have been possible at cruise altitude. The left engine, still feeding data through its monitoring channel. The right, silent. The onboard power matrix, out of sync. Every parameter hints at manual intervention or catastrophic instability. Then, one last transmission. Not a message, just a ping, the digital equivalent of a heartbeat. It travels up, bounces off the Inmarsat I3 satellite, and returns 200 milliseconds later. The final echo of a machine falling silent. No distress call, no mayday, no coordinates, just that one line of code. Proof that something was still alive aboard 370 for 6 minutes longer than the public was ever told. What was happening inside this cabin? Was the pilot fighting for control or executing one final plan? Did a system restart by accident or by intention? And why did Malaysia's released report stop just short of these entries? In aviation data, the absence of information is information itself. Every gap tells a story, and this gap suggests a struggle no one has yet decoded. Whatever occurred between 013 and 019 UTC, the final 6 minutes of Flight 370's life is locked inside a dataset that remains unreleased or unexplained. This is where the trail ends, and where our investigation begins. To understand the final 6 minutes, we rewind to the first 60. Flight 370, a twin-engine Boeing 777, lifts off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 041 local time. Destination, Beijing. Crew, 2 pilots, 10 cabin staff, 227 passengers. A routine red-eye over the South China Sea. For the first 38 minutes, everything is normal. Clear skies, standard climb, routine handoffs between controllers. The aircraft reaches 35,000 feet, stable, efficient, on course. Good night, Malaysian 370. The final word spoken from the cockpit. Seconds later, the transponder goes dark. Military radar picks up an unregistered echo turning back across the peninsula, a maneuver so clean it could only be deliberate. Altitude fluctuates. The plane descends to low level over the Malacca Strait, skimming under radar coverage. Then, total invisibility. No radar, no radio, no civilian trace. Yet, 370 wasn't gone. At 2:25, a faint digital pulse reaches the satellite network. The first of a series of automated handshakes. Each one an electronic wave confirming the aircraft's power systems were still alive. These handshakes continue for nearly 7 hours. Each one plotted as a ring, not a position, but a distance from the satellite, creating the now infamous arcs across the Indian Ocean. Between 2:25 and 019 UTC, the plane's onboard systems speak in bursts. No voice, no location, just math. Those numbers became the only surviving record of its final flight. But something happens in the last window, between 011 and 019, that breaks the pattern. A relog, a power event, a system restart. Malaysia's official report lists it as normal satellite activity. Independent analysts disagree. One shows a quiet descent into fuel starvation. The other, a deliberate reactivation at altitude. If both can't be true, which one was, and who, or what, triggered it? By the time the final ping was sent, the aircraft's engines had likely flamed out. It was gliding, silently, over the southern Indian Ocean, somewhere along the 7th arc. 6 minutes later, its digital voice stopped forever. The question is, did those final minutes unfold as Malaysia claimed, or was there one last maneuver, one not meant to be found? Airplanes don't just disappear. They go silent, piece by piece. Each part of a modern jet has a digital voice: the transponder, the ACARS system, the satellite terminal. Each speaks through a different circuit, powered by its own electrical source. For Flight 370, those voices didn't all die at once. At 1:21, the transponder, the aircraft's name tag to air traffic control, was switched off. That requires human input, a flip of a guarded switch. No mechanical failure can disable it alone. At nearly the same moment, ACARS, the aircraft communications addressing and reporting system, stops transmitting scheduled data. This is the digital courier that sends fuel, speed, and maintenance readings to the airline servers. It can be turned off from the cockpit menu. And it was. After that, radio silence. For civilian systems, the aircraft ceased to exist, but there was one link no one could manually silence without shutting the plane down entirely: the satellite handshake system, known as SATCOM. This system doesn't transmit voice or coordinates on its own. It only confirms that the terminal is alive. Every hour, the satellite sends a digital handshake. "Are you there?" The aircraft replies automatically, "Still here." It's not a voice, it's a heartbeat. Between 2:25 and 0:19 UTC, there were 7 of those heartbeats, and one of them looked wrong. Normally, these signals occur in steady, predictable cycles. But at 0:19, the aircraft initiated a new logon, meaning the SATCOM terminal had just rebooted. That implies a power interruption, temporary, then restored. Which raises the question, how could a plane nearly out of fuel, plunging toward the ocean, suddenly restart a complex communications array? Inside the 777, electrical power flows through twin generators on each engine. If one fails, the other can sustain all essential systems. If both fail, as happens when the engines flame out, an automatic backup deploys, the RAT or ram air turbine. This small propeller unfolds beneath the fuselage, generating enough power to feed minimal flight controls and, crucially, the SATCOM unit. But only after a brief power loss. That short blackout would cause exactly what was observed: a brief outage, followed by a log-on request as systems reconnected. The timing fits. The reboot occurred precisely 6 minutes before the final handshake, suggesting one thing: both engines had just run dry. But here's the problem. The fuel exhaustion model assumes the aircraft was on autopilot, gliding gently until it hit the sea. Yet the final data suggests otherwise. Inmarsat's analysis detected a sudden change in the frequency offset, the Doppler shift caused by relative motion. That shift hints at a steep, accelerating descent, as if the aircraft had nosed down, controlled or terminal. If the pilot was conscious, he would have seen the displays fading, hydraulics straining, alarms cascading across the panel. He would have known. These were the last 6 minutes of flight. But if the cockpit was unmanned or depressurized, then the aircraft had become a ghost. Its systems running on fragments of power, its satellite voice calling out one last time before vanishing into the ocean's dark. A reboot, a silence, a final heartbeat in the data. These were not random failures. They were a sequence. And that sequence tells us something, or someone, was still in control long after official reports suggest otherwise. If the system spoke truthfully, then the end was not instant. It was drawn out, mechanical, methodical, and deliberate. Machines can tell us how something failed, but only humans can tell us why. Behind the instruments, the codes, and the telemetry sat 2 pilots. One of them had flown this route hundreds of times. He knew every frequency, every transition point, every radar handoff by heart. It was supposed to be uneventful. A 5.5-hour hop to Beijing. Routine. Predictable. But routine is deceptive. It's the calmest seas that hide the deepest currents. At 1:19 local time, just after crossing the Malaysian coastline, a voice said calmly, "Good night, Malaysian 370. Tone normal, no stress detected. Seconds later, the transponder went dark. What happened in that space between words and silence? Investigators later studied the flight simulator found in the captain's home. Among hundreds of normal practice routes, one caught attention. A simulated track into the southern Indian Ocean. No destination, no return. Was it coincidence? A practice for remote navigation? Or a blueprint of intent? The recovered data fragments showed an unfinished route, ending on an empty ocean grid. But here's the nuance. The file was incomplete, missing timestamps, and possibly assembled from test runs months apart. Nothing definitive, just suggestive. Friends described him as calm, methodical, deeply skilled. Some say distant, others quietly troubled. He built custom flight panels at home. He followed aviation forums, practiced emergency procedures for fun. Nothing in his record suggests instability, but sometimes the most controlled hands hide the deepest turmoil. And then, there was the first officer, young, competent, nearing the peak of his training. His microphone left open once before takeoff, picking up casual conversation. After that, no known voice from him again. If what happened aboard 370 was intentional, it would require one person's control and one person's silence. That imbalance is haunting. One theory suggests cabin depressurization, a slow leak, a deliberate adjustment of altitude and pressurization settings, enough to render everyone unconscious in minutes, while the aircraft kept flying on autopilot. The flight would then continue, empty of life, across the Indian Ocean. A ghost ship in the sky. But another possibility cuts deeper. That the pilot remained conscious to the very end, guiding the aircraft along the arcs, conserving fuel, maintaining altitude, waiting for the moment when no radar, no radio, and no human eye could see. If that's true, then those final 6 minutes, the power reset, the last ping, weren't accidents. They were decisions. Malaysia's official narrative avoids speculation about motive. But in private, investigators described the possibility of pilot control until impact. A phrase as cold as it is final. Even so, no note was left. No manifesto. No trace of intent beyond a silent flight path into darkness. So what drove it? Despair? Protest? A calculated message lost to the sea? Or something we still misunderstand about the data itself? In aviation, data and humanity rarely collide this violently. We read traces of people through machines, through voltage, through pings. When a plane disappears, data becomes language, and language can be bent. From the same set of numbers, 3 entirely different stories have been told, each plausible, each incomplete, each pointing to a different kind of ending. The ghost flight. The first and most official version, the ghost flight theory. It begins with depressurization, gradual, silent, deadly. The crew loses consciousness within minutes. The plane, still on autopilot, continues west, then south. Fuel burns evenly. The flight computers maintain altitude until the tanks run dry. At 019, both engines flame out. Power flickers. The satellite terminal reboots, sending the final handshake. Moments later, the aircraft enters an aerodynamic descent, nose down, wings level, until it impacts the sea. It's the simplest explanation. No intent, just tragedy through physics. The ghost flight model struggles with one detail, the precision of the turns, early in the flight. Military radar shows coordinated changes in altitude and direction, not random drift, not system error. Someone was flying that plane, at least for the first hour. So who programmed its final path? And why aim into emptiness? The controlled ditch. The second theory assumes control lasted longer, that the pilot, or someone in command, stayed conscious until the very end. The evidence, the final satellite burst frequency offset. If interpreted carefully, it suggests a shallow descent, not a dive, consistent with a deliberate ditching maneuver. If true, the wreckage would have sunk largely intact, explaining why so little debris has ever been found. Fragments did wash up years later, but never the main fuselage, never the flight recorders. Could they be resting whole, deep along the broken ridge south of the arc? Or were they simply never there? The controlled ditch theory carries a chilling implication that whoever guided the aircraft stayed alive through those final minutes, watching instruments die one by one, knowing the world would search forever, but never find the truth. The misread data. The third theory questions the foundation itself. That maybe we've been decoding the wrong language all along. Inmarsat's analysis, the arcs, the pings, the Doppler shifts, was unprecedented. No aircraft had ever been tracked solely by satellite handshake offsets. Even the smallest calibration error, milliseconds of drift, could shift the calculated impact zone by hundreds of kilometers. Independent analysts proposed alternative models, that the aircraft might have turned north, not south, that the Doppler data could be misinterpreted due to satellite motion, or that a final transmission spike indicated not a descent, but a climb. If the satellite math was wrong, then the search zones, hundreds of millions of dollars and years of effort, might all have been focused on the wrong ocean. And yet every review of the original data points back to one conclusion: south. So why does the North still whisper through forums, archives, and private analysis? Because every line of data is shadowed by what's missing. The black boxes, the radar tapes, the full SATCOM logs, Malaysia never made public. Until that data is released, certainty will remain a mirage. The undeclared fourth. There is one more theory, spoken rarely in official reports: the possibility of intervention. That something external disrupted the aircraft. A sudden loss of control due to military interception, electronic interference, or even an onboard struggle for command. There's no solid evidence for any of it, but absence of evidence, when paired with secrecy, feeds endless conjecture. Because some of the most crucial data, the radar tapes from Malaysia, Thailand, and India, and the full communication logs from Inmarsat, have never been released in unredacted form, which means we are left with echoes. And from those echoes, the world has built competing ghosts. One aircraft, three endings, three truths, each negating the others. But only one sequence of events could have produced the final 6 minutes of data, and it remains unverified. When technology and intention intertwine, the line between malfunction and decision blurs. Was this accident or architecture? Desperation or design? For years, the story of Flight 370 ended at 019 UTC, a single handshake, then nothing. But time has a strange way of revealing what silence hides. Because years later, engineers, oceanographers, and independent data analysts would begin redecoding those very same signals. Not with new information, but with better eyes. They noticed something subtle: a wobble in the final transmission, a micro shift in frequency lasting just fractions of a second. To most, it was noise. To them, it was a signature: the downward spike. When the Inmarsat signal was plotted over time, the last two data bursts showed a steep downward drift in the burst frequency offset, or BFO. Translated into physics, that frequency drop corresponds to motion, specifically rapid descent. The models indicate vertical speeds exceeding 15,000 feet per minute, too steep for a controlled glide, too fast for autopilot correction. It wasn't a level ditching, it was a fall. But the key question remains: what triggered it? Was it fuel starvation leading to aerodynamic stall? Or was it a deliberate nose-down command, a final, irreversible descent? If both engines had flamed out minutes earlier, the hydraulic systems would have weakened, controls sluggish. And yet, the data shows motion too smooth to be purely ballistic, almost as if someone was still guiding it. The debris puzzle. Then came the debris. 18 months after the disappearance, a single piece of wreckage washed ashore on Reunion Island, a flaperon from a Boeing 777. Its condition was strange: edges intact, hinges sealed, buoyant enough to drift for over a year. Barnacle growth patterns later matched ocean drift models that traced backward, straight toward the southern Indian Ocean, near the seventh arc. Over the next few years, more fragments appeared along the African coast, Madagascar and Mauritius. Inner panels, cabin trim, even a section of a wing. Some showed clean fractures, as if broken off by impact. Others looked torn, suggesting secondary disintegration under stress. but none bore signs of fire, explosion, or decompression. The physical evidence spoke softly, of a high-speed impact into water, but not of mid-air destruction. And that small but critical distinction confirmed something the final signal implied. The aircraft was whole until the very end. The unreleased logs. Yet, even as the picture sharpened, one shadow refused to fade: the missing data from Malaysia's internal server logs. During the official investigation, only summaries of the satellite data were released publicly, not the raw message logs, not the exact transmission timestamps. When independent analysts requested them, they were told the originals were not available. That missing data might explain whether the 019 event was a routine power restart, or a deliberate relog on from a live cockpit. Because within those 6 minutes, tiny timing discrepancies, seconds or milliseconds, could change the interpretation entirely. Some internal memos, leaked years later, mention additional diagnostic messages recorded by the ground station, messages never included in the final report. If verified, they could reveal whether the satellite handshake originated automatically or was manually re-triggered. If the latter, then someone was still awake inside 370. Acoustic clues. In 2018, researchers analyzed underwater acoustic records from hydrophones in the region. They detected a faint, low-frequency impulse at roughly the right time, consistent with a large object striking the ocean surface. It was triangulated to an area not far from the 7th arc, but outside the main search zone. Too weak to prove, too close to ignore. If that sound was MH370, it might mean the aircraft came down hundreds of kilometers from where search teams focused their deepest dives. And yet, no wreckage field has ever been located there. Only the echo remains. The satellite shadow. Then there's the strangest claim of all: a shadow caught by a weather satellite. An independent researcher once analyzed infrared readings from Himawari 8, the Japanese geostationary satellite positioned above the same longitude as Inmarsat's. In a few frames, a faint thermal anomaly appears, southwest of the last known arc, timed within minutes of the final handshake. Official agencies dismissed it as image noise, but the coordinates align eerily close to the drift-back projection of the recovered flaperon. Coincidence? Possibly. But every coincidence in this case seems to form a pattern. A new reconstruction, combining all new inputs: the re-decoded frequency drift, the debris drift paths, and the acoustic data. A new model emerged. It suggests a final, steep descent from roughly 35,000 feet to sea level in under 2 minutes. No evidence of horizontal flight after 021. No sign of attempted recovery. The aircraft struck the ocean intact, likely at high speed, and sank almost instantly. And yet, for all the data, for all the modeling, no one can still answer the one question that started it all. Why? The truth beneath the surface. Somewhere beneath 3 miles of water lies the cockpit voice recorder, a machine that has not spoken in over a decade. Its data could confirm whether the final 6 minutes were chaos or control. And perhaps that's why some evidence remains unreleased, because the truth it contains is unbearable. Until those drives are found, until the missing logs surface, the final story of Flight 370 will remain half-written. A sequence of pings, each one a fragment of a truth withheld. Somewhere beneath this horizon, beneath 3 miles of silence, lies the truth. A cockpit recorder, a flight data unit, a final log, trapped in pressure and darkness, waiting for a listener. But 10 years on, the sea still keeps its secret. The vanishing age. How could a 250-ton aircraft vanish in the age of total surveillance? In an era where every phone call, every text, every ship is traceable, a passenger jet simply ceased to exist. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time we realized how fragile our illusion of omniscience truly is. For decades, we've trusted that data equals control, that systems can't lie, that the skies are transparent. But MH370 proved otherwise. That even with satellites, radar, and global tracking networks, blind spots remain, vast ones. And in those blind patches, truth can disappear as easily as signal. The data we don't see. The mystery of Flight 370 isn't only about a plane. It's about the architecture of knowledge and who controls it. Governments possess full radar logs, communication traces, and fragments of satellite metadata never released to the public. Official reports speak of transparency, yet critical appendices are labeled classified or incomplete. When asked why, the answers blur behind phrases like national security, privacy laws, international agreements. But the question persists: if those withheld seconds of data could rewrite the narrative, shouldn't they be shared? Or does what they reveal carry consequences too large, too destabilizing for any single nation to bear? Secrecy feeds speculation, and speculation becomes myth. What began as an air disaster has transformed into a modern legend, the first true mystery of the digital age, the human equation. For the families, mystery isn't curiosity, it's torment. Years pass and still no closure, no wreckage field, no bodies recovered, no confirmed last words. Hope becomes its own form of suffering, because as long as there's no proof of death, the mind imagines survival. Every new theory reopens every wound. One mother once said, "We don't want a conspiracy, we want coordinates." Aviation's awakening. In the years since MH370, aviation changed. Global satellite tracking became mandatory for oceanic routes. Automatic distress broadcasts were redesigned to activate when transponders fail or go offline. Every minute of flight now leaves a fingerprint in the sky. Yet those reforms exist because of a mystery that should never have happened. A vanishing that shouldn't have been possible. Even now, no system is foolproof. If Flight 370 vanished once, could it happen again? Technically, yes. All it takes is a sequence of decisions and a few blind minutes between networks. We learned much about data, but little about intent, and intent remains untraceable. The eternal loop. Every 60 minutes, the Inmarsat satellite still circles above, pinging aircraft across the hemisphere. Each handshake a question. Are you there? Every flight answers automatically, still here. But one signal, the one that never answered back, still lingers in the log. A digital scar. The system continues to query that ID, long deactivated, long gone. And every hour, the network still asks a ghost for a reply. What if the final truth of MH370 isn't technical, but human? A single decision, buried under algorithms, lost to time and water. What if the real disappearance wasn't the plane, but our ability to agree on what happened? A pilot, a machine, a sky full of data. And still, no answer. Maybe that's the lesson, that even in an age of total information, mystery still survives. And perhaps it needs to. Because as long as we're still asking what happened, we're still trying to understand what it means to not know. Somewhere beneath the waves, a recorder waits. Until it speaks, we listen to the silence.